You're live.
Let's roll them.
Go ahead and introduce yourself.
That's Hutton.
It's J-E-F at Hutton.
See that?
The problem is, a lot of people don't listen.
It's the only one F. What the hell?
It's the E-F.
Oh, really?
E-F. Hutton.
EF Hutton. I got you.
You know, some guy's been around a little while, actually knows what that means. I say
Yeah.
that joke to like younger people, like who?
Yeah, I know what that is.
Oh, we're
So I say when I speak, my wife doesn't listen.
we're old.
All right, my name's Jeff. I think I've been here a couple times with you guys on some recovery and evacuation things. So today we're gonna go over mainly A2Ls, right? We'll do A2Ls, A3s, kind of go over kind of how the process, a lot of you know this, but how they got rid of R22, how they got rid of Fortinet, and so on and so forth. My ultimate goal is to explain what these refrigerants are, but also talk about, I think everybody's still kind of suffering some PTSD from the R22 to Fortinet transition.
Oh, yeah.
We all know how fun that was. But it's understanding why that was really a big issue, right? The differences between the two. Everybody knows what's the number one difference that you notice between 22 and Fortinet?
Pressure.
Right. That's what everybody comes to, and that's very true. The pressures were completely different, right? A lot higher with Fortinet. But the big difference really was the oils. That's where all the messes came in the industry. We had leaky coils and so on and so forth. It was because of the oils, and I'll go over that. But in R22, what kind of oil did we have? Mineral, right? And then in Fortinet, we went to POE. And there's a big difference between those two. A lot of things that happened. Really what happened was not understanding those oil differences was we kept doing our processes on commissioning systems, mainly going to evacuation and things like that. How we did with R22, you had a lot of room for error, right? You could put on a pump for an hour and say, hey, it's good, even though you didn't get all the moisture out because you don't have that many issues with a mineral oil-based refrigerant. You switch over to POE, it's a whole different story, right? And we'll kind of go through that a little bit. But the big thing that I want to do is I want to explain the A2Ls, what they are. I want to explain A3s, what they are, what the differences are, right? And then kind of put to ease this whole A2L refrigerant. Have you guys gone through any trainings with A2Ls?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've got some good things that I throw out to people, a lot of people, especially in the residential market, because nowadays homeowners have access to everything, right? They can go on the internet, they can find this and find out, oh, I don't want this flammable refrigerant in my house, right? So I'll give you some tips and tricks for that, especially with the building owners and all that. Oh, I don't want this stuff in my building because it's gonna catch fire and blah, blah, blah. We'll go through all that. So, kind of the Clean Air Act and now, do a little bit of, which a lot of you probably know, but a little bit of a timeline here. So in 1990, we started pushing the EPA 608, right? Everybody's taking that, I'm assuming? Right?
Yeah.
So the big thing to remember is there is no special certification for A2Ls. All right, you're not gonna take a special test or anything like that. It's all gonna be wrapped in 608. So if you have your 608, you're good to work with A2Ls. All right. I think what you're gonna start seeing is people are renewing 608 or coming in to take 608. They're gonna see A2L questions on there. Okay. As long as you have your 608, you're good to go. 1996 was phased out of Class 1 CFCs. Then we jump all the way to 2014 EPA updated ruling on HCFCs. 2020, there's no new R22 production, right? So as of 2020, they stopped all R22 manufacturing and production, okay? And then in 2020, U.S. American Innovation Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, right? We'll go over that here in a second. One thing a lot of people are saying is with the new/old administration coming back in, that, oh, we're gonna see Fortinet come back and everything else. No, that's not gonna happen, all right? We're going A2Ls, that's the way it's going, the horse is out of the barn. And if you think about it, this AIM Act was actually signed under this administration last time, all right? So we're not going back from A2Ls, all right? And then in 2021, EPA announced the phase down of HFCs. So we're talking 404, 134, Fortinet, so on and so forth, the big one we deal with, right? I know you guys deal with commercial applications a lot, but Fortinet. So they started the allocation and the dismantling of Fortinet from 2021, and all production of Fortinet stopped as of December 31st of last year. Now the big thing is, don't run out and start buying tons of Fortinet. There's a lot of issues that are going on with Fortinet as well as 454B right now. But if you've noticed, prices on Fortinet have been pretty low over the last 2 or 3 years, right? So one of the beautiful things about these tariffs are, those prices are gonna come back up, and that's good for all of us, right? It's good for everybody out there. What was happening was you had a lot of offshore countries or other countries. They weren't allowed to ship Fortinet in cylinders, right, into the United States. So what do?
Boxed them all.
Everybody knows what 410A is made up of?
No.
32?
32 and 125, right? So what they would do is they would ship over 32, they would ship over 125, and they would send it out to mixers, all right? The nice thing about this presentation is I'm not in a certain manufacturer's, I'm not representing a certain manufacturer of refrigerants. You've got three main ones out there in the US. You've got Chemours, you've got Arkema, and you've got Honeywell. Those are your three main US manufacturers, and they're all held to purity standards, right? Which is a big thing. We say purity, obviously it's purity. Really what that comes down to is moisture content, okay? And this is the big issue that we had with 410A and POE oils. So when we're looking at that, what happened was they're sending over all this stuff and then they're mixing it. For one, yes, they're held to regulations, but you really don't know what the purity is, right? So from those main three that I talked about, they're held to those purity standards. They have to test everything else, moisture content, whatever it may be. You know what you're getting. Well, all of a sudden you start seeing these imports coming in and the purity standards are just kind of eh. Same thing even with the cylinders. So what was happening was, for the last 2 or 3 years, the price of 410A is just dumped. I mean, it was bad. It was really, really bad for a while. Now it's coming back up because a lot of these tariffs and regulations are starting to be put on. So they really have to force it to the American manufacturers. I do sell refrigerant, but I'm not from one of those three. We also offer reclaim services. So what we were seeing was, I get distributors call me up and they would say, "Oh man, I found this great price at 410A for a pallet," and they get it really, really low. I said, "Well, that's great, but you don't know where it's coming from." My usual joke is if the box looks overly American, it's probably Chinese. And if the box is overly environmental, it's got green vines on it and flowers and everything else, it's probably offshore stuff too, right? And they do tricky things, like you're supposed to have AHRI, I think 901 numbers on the box. They'll like flip a couple of those letters around. They'll say AHRI 901. There's a lot of copying going on out there. So that's why I always push American manufacturers, okay? The other thing would be, you get crappy cylinders out there too. So you might be getting a pallet of 40 cylinders, but then in the middle you got 3 in there that are completely empty. So that great price you got is completely blown out of the window, okay? A lot of things. So with 410A, obviously they started phasing it down as of December 31st, 2024, no new manufacturing. But again, that's not to say, hey, go out there and start buying it up because, price is gonna skyrocket. There is tons and tons and tons of 410A out there. You don't know how many are still sitting at the manufacturer, right? I guarantee you, almost every distributor out there has a ton of 410A readily available, and it's gonna be available for a long time, because we're not even talking about reclaimed 410A, right? You're gonna have that for a very, very long time. So 410A is gonna be around for a long time, but I'll talk about that here in a second too. So just to give you kind of an example, the HCFC phase down, okay? Well, they phased it down like they did 410A, but in 2015 they issued a reallocation. Reallocation meaning, okay, US manufacturers, you can go out there and start producing some more R22. And this is kind of how it went. So in 2013, right, they're at about 63% of what their normal 100% manufacturing rates were. Okay, and as you can see, I got a laser on this thing. Oh, look at that. So as you can see, right, 2014 went down 19%, so on and so forth, and we got to 2020, and then it was completely out and gone. But again, you can still get R22 pretty easily, right, if you need it. It's all reclaim, okay? You guys understand the reclaim process? So what happens is you're gonna bring in a reclaim cylinder of whatever refrigerant it is, right? You're gonna take that to your distributor. Your distributor works with a reclaimer. I do represent a reclaimer. So they're gonna send it in. Once they get so many cylinders, they send it back to the reclaimer, and they've got all these vats. And everybody knows each refrigerant has a certain boiling point, right? So what they do, and this is one of the main reasons, you guys might remember when you take your cylinder in, a full recovered cylinder, you take it into the distributor and they're gonna say, oh, we'll give you so much per pound of R22 or whatever else. And you always pretty much got disappointed because what would happen is they would send that, say you turn in a recovered cylinder of R22. You're like, man, this is gold, I'm gonna get some good money for this. They would send it in to the reclaimer. Reclaimers have high-end gas chromatographs. They're literally hooking up these cylinders and they can tell you exactly what's in that cylinder. And what we would see a lot of times, and they'll give you those reports, they would say, okay, it's 25% R22, 40% 410A, there's some 407C in there, and there's also some 134 in there, right? So if there's one thing I can push out there is when you're recovering refrigerant, try to keep it as close to that one refrigerant that you possibly can. Because if you want prices to stay low on these refrigerants that aren't manufactured anymore, that's one big thing, because it costs a reclaimer a lot of money to separate these things out and to clean them up. And the more gas that they get that they can't reclaim, right, if it's too mixed, they've got to burn it off and let it go, all right? So this kind of shows you how, obviously, the whole R22 rephase came back in, and now that's obviously gone from manufacturing. So the AIM Act, this is what was pushed in 2020. The American Innovation Manufacturing Act, enacted by Congress on December 27, 2020. Okay, so that was under this administration last time. Pretty much three things here. It's all to phase down HFCs, phasing down production and consumption. So obviously production, they're not manufacturing anymore of these things, right? So 410A, 134, 404, things like that. And consumption, obviously their ultimate goal is to get rid of consumption as well. But as I'll show here in a little bit, they're looking at like a 15 to a 20 year timing from here on out of 410A consumption, right? Maximizing reclamation and minimizing releases from equipment, as I talked about, that's one thing that keeps me in business with Appion is we have to recover these refrigerants. We can't let those go out in the atmosphere. And obviously releases of equipment. I think, this is my personal feeling, this isn't the statement of any other manufacturer out there or anything like that. R22 is a great refrigerant, I think most of you would agree, compared to what we're using, today, right? As I said before, it was, you had a lot more room for air, but the biggest thing was, we could put on a pump, we always want you to do it the right way, but you could put on a pump, let it go for an hour, get the moisture out of there, and most of the time that system's gonna run for a very, very long time, right? Because you all remember the micron gauges, we call them a Christmas tree, right? There's numbers written on there, and the pretty little lights that go up and down, it was more of an indicator more than anything else, right? Agreed 100%, but you could use that back in the day, in a sense, because you're getting to a point where okay, it's dry, maybe not all the moisture's out of there, but the big difference was when you switch over to 410A, the reason why we had to make sure we got down below 500, right, and make sure that system held, was because of those oils, as I was talking about before. So R22, mineral oil. Anybody know the differences between mineral oil and POE? The main difference is they're both hygroscopic in nature, right, so they both soak in moisture. The real problem is that mineral oil has a very soft surface tension. So if you're pulling a vacuum on a mineral oil system, R22, 134, whatever, you can get down to a certain point where, say, you get down to 20 or 2,000 microns, 1,500 microns, it starts to really slow. It's because you're actually pulling moisture out of the oil, all right? You can actually break the moisture out of the top of that oil, the surface tension, because it's very soft. Well, 410A, it's got a very tough surface tension, right? It's almost like taking saran wrap over the top of that and then trying to pull moisture through it. Once it gets in there, it's not getting out of there. The other and biggest issue is when you mix moisture with mineral oil, you don't create anything. Okay, it's okay. When you mix moisture with POE, what do you get? Acid, right? So now we're running that through the inside of the system. And that also lends to that whole purity standard that I'm talking about as well with 410A. You don't know what the moisture content of those cylinders, those brand new cylinders you're buying, if it's not from one of the big three, you necessarily don't know if it's a dry refrigerant or not, right? So you might already be dealing with a big cylinder of acid. Now here's my take on what was happening with a lot of leaky coils and everything else when we switched over to 410A. So what did coils used to be made of? Copper, right? And then they switched over to aluminum. And then with those aluminum coils, what did they start doing? They started making them thinner and thinner and thinner, right? Micro channels, so on and so forth. Well, again, with R22 systems, you didn't have that acid running on the inside. With 410A systems, you did. So now what are we doing? We're eating out the inside of those systems, and those coils are getting thinner and thinner and thinner, right? Then I got to take it one step further. What are a lot of people cleaning coils with?
Coil cleaner.
Which is
Acid.
right. So when I get down, now there's some good ones out there. I got 3 I'll recommend, but like the blue foaming coil cleaners, right? That was everybody used them. And what would happen is I'd ask guys all the time, I said, well, when you spread those out and they foam, why is it foaming? Half the class would say, well, it's reacting with the dirt and the grease and the oil. No, it's not. It's literally reacting with the aluminum. It's eating the aluminum and etching the aluminum off the coil. That's why when you get on there, it's all dull and nasty looking, but when you spray it off and rinse it off, it's all nice and shiny, because you've literally eaten a layer of that coil off of there. So the 3 I always recommend is from 3 different companies. That way I'm not being biased to anybody, but you've got New Calgon's Tri-Power, you've got Diversitex Triple D, and I think Ace Chemicals has Super D. Those 3 are great. They're not gonna foam up on you, but they take care of it. Usually the 3 Ds is detergent, deodorant, and a degreaser. And if you don't believe me on the blue coil cleaner, all you gotta do is take a water bottle, put some blue coil cleaner in there, stick something underneath it, take some aluminum foil, drop it down in there, it's gonna foam up and over. Leave it in there for a minute, pull that aluminum foil out, it's gone. It's tattered and gone. They say after an average use of 3 coil cleanings with a blue foaming or a foaming coal cleaner, you've eaten 7 to 12% of the mass of that coil. So the reason why I went this long way around was, we switch over to 410A because it's supposed to be better in the environment, but we're releasing how many more times of it in the field because we've got all these leaks on coils. And again, a lot of people would say, oh, it was the coil manufacturers that had the issue. I don't doubt that. There could have been some issues there, but it's the way we were doing it. We were doing our processes of evacuation, so on and so forth, with 410A like we were with R22. So that was the big difference there, right? So you want to define POE versus mineral. The nice thing is these new refrigerants we're going to talk about are all POE oil. So it's no different than 410A. And as you'll see, the pressures are very similar too. The only difference with them mostly is, one, is it's better for the environment, right? And two, the pressure is the same. Two, it's got the same POE oils through the whole thing. All right, so it's going to be nice and easy transfer. The biggest thing is that they call it mildly flammable because it's an A2L, right? Not an A1. And then lastly, facilitating the transition of next generation technologies through sector-based restrictions, blah, 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 blah. It all comes into phasing out, right, these refrigerants. So here's your HFC phase down. So this is the whole drive for A2Ls, plain and simple. Whether you like it or not, I'm not making it political, but it is what it is. It comes down to right here. This rule is expanded to prevent the equivalent of 187 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. That's what the whole drive is, right? So it's all pushed by the EPA, plain and simple. So this is kind of what I was talking about before. We'll phase down the U.S. production and consumption of HFCs by 85% over the next 15 years. So that's production and consumption, right? Production's already pretty much done. So what's happening is after December 31st of this past year in 2024, when they stop production, the government knows how much of, we'll just say 410A, right? How much 410A has been produced. So they know the whole bucket of what's out there, right? So we talk about production and consumption. Production's set, that's done. Now we talk about consumption. So in a sense, you can track how much has been lost, right, out in the marketplace, whether it's due to leaks or whatever else. They can also track through all the reclaimers, what they're reclaiming, what the reclaimers are pushing back out there. You're gonna have some loss there too. So their ultimate goal is 85% over the next 15 years. So by 2040, they want 85% reduction in all consumption as well for 410A or HFCs. Does that make sense?
What doesn't make sense is, if you go back to that slide, there is no mandate to recover CO2 from the refrigeration systems that
No.
we're going
I
into.
know, I agree with you 100%. That's why I say it's the EPA and we gotta follow what they say. I agree with you 100%. I mean, we can go into photosynthesis and everything else, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of times comes down to common sense, but hey, it is what it is. But this, like I said, this just kind of shows you since 2022, the reduction of 410A, 134, 404, things like that. The other way, I don't have this in this presentation, but you get down to the, you guys familiar with Climate Alliance states? The Kigali Agreement, all that was done back in the teens, right? So pretty much what happens is you'll get one or two major states in the United States that have a lot of commerce, right? They have a lot of business out there. And you can pick what states those are. I think most of us know what those are. Well, the one big state out there says, okay, we're getting rid of 404. And they got to the point in the first place, you got a bunch of politicians and lawmakers that say, okay, we don't want this stuff at all. I don't care if you bought a 404 chiller last year, it's getting out of here, right? So what are businesses gonna say to that? You pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a 404 system, you're telling us we gotta get rid of it? And then that's when they get in there and they start talking their stuff and this and that. So even though this wasn't being pushed right away, a couple big states would say, oh, we're done with 404, we're done. So the manufacturers are going, well, we don't wanna make this stuff just for these so many states over here when these 22 Climate Alliance states are saying they're gonna ban 404. So what do? They start pushing away from 404, right? So if I ever had to say there's two refrigerants that I would take a look at and make sure you're on top of, because those prices might go up, be 404 and 507. Those are gonna be the two big ones. I can see those prices ramping up pretty quickly over the next 6 months to a year. Not gonna get too much into this. It's the individual HFCs that are listed in the AMAC, right? So you've got all your common names down here. I've got all your chemical compositions, all the different refrigerants, right? A lot of these you guys use, you've been with. Exchange value is pretty much your GWP value. The big one that caused so many issues was this one right here, the 125. That's the one we were using a lot in 134, 404, 507, 410A, right? 410A was what, 50% 32, 50% 125. I got a question for you since you got me on the water thing. Do you know what 125 is mainly used for, or used as?
No.
Fire
Ignition?
suppressant, as a fire suppressant.
Oh,
So, but that was the one that was doing the most damage to the environment, right? So that's really was that issue with all those HFCs that they wanted to get rid of, because 125 plays in a lot of these refrigerants. But your refrigerant also would have been considered a fire suppressant as well, right? The 719.
And they weren't torched.
All right, so the HFC phase down. Pretty much to ensure compliance with phase down limits, here's the final rule. Establishes an electronic tracking system for the movement of HFCs through commerce. All right, now that's not necessarily you guys out in your vans. What this comes down to is, like I talked about before, they're tracking the production at the manufacturing level, right? And then the transport down at the distribution level, and then the transport from there, okay? They're trying to track everything so they know through commerce, especially, which is good for all of us, is the offshore stuff too. Because they know what we've made, right? They know what we have as US manufacturers, and there's a lot of junk coming in. I remember one time I used to work with Chemours, great company, DuPont, it's the old DuPont, right? They're one of the big three. And they were saying that one of their refrigerants, it was a purple cylinder, and it was getting shipped from South America. Now, Chemours got really smart. They started putting these certain clear stickers on the bottom that were UV barcodes, right? So you only could see them through UV. Well, whoever it was, they literally made the same exact thing. Same cylinders, same boxes. They even got it down to the UV barcode. And it was all pirated refrigerant that was being shipped into the United States, and they didn't even know it, right? So they get pretty tricky on this stuff. So the electronic tracking system is there. They have, you know, certain things on certain cylinders and packaging and all that to where they can track most of this stuff. Requires the use of refillable cylinders and container labeling requirements. 2025, it's a full ban. Establishes administrative consequences. Okay, so this pretty much comes down to, again, your manufacturers, your distributors, and things like that, where revocation or retirement of allowances for non-compliance and be in addition to any civil or criminal enforcement action. That was just like with 22, they did the same thing when they cut that off, right? So they're doing the same thing with 410A to make sure that there's no production or no offshore stuff coming in. Requires third-party auditing of companies' record keeping and reporting. Could that come all the way down to a contractor? Technically it could. I haven't seen it happen. But mainly that's gonna be for your resellers, right? Your manufacturers and your resellers, your distributors and things like that. And in third-party companies, like I work for Summit Refrigerants. We source from all these different refrigerant manufacturers and we resell as well, so that would also apply to us. This is the biggest thing, is it provides transparency of HFC production and consumption data for the general public. So you can go on there, you can see how many pounds or how many tons or whatever else of 410A is currently out there and how they're starting to reduce that. In addition to prevent illegal trade HFCs, like I talked about, EPA is coordinating with other federal agencies, in particular Customs and Border Protection, to make sure this stuff isn't coming in from overseas, okay? So here's a lot of your common refrigerant compositions, and a lot of you probably know this, but some of the big ones, like I was talking about before, you got 410A here, it's an A1 refrigerant, 50 and 50. So you got 125 in there, as I was talking about, that's that problem refrigerant. Look at how many refrigerants it's in, right? It composes a lot of these refrigerants. So the interesting thing is, 410A is also 50% R32. R32 is one of the A2Ls that we're gonna be working with, right? Pretty much your main two, there's some other ones out there, but your main two are gonna be 454B and 32, which we'll talk about. So that's what I say, when this is considered a fire suppressant, right? R32 is a mildly flammable refrigerant, that's why it carried an A1 moniker with it, because you had the 125 mixed in with it. And then, like I said before, you go down to 404 and 507, those are those two ones that they're gonna be creeping up in price. You look at your components of 125 there, right, 44 and 50. So what they started looking at was, they had, each manufacturer has what they call an allocation, right? So they have allocations of each of these refrigerants. So, okay, they're banning 404 in 24 states. What can I do? I can take my 125 from my 404 production, and what can I do? I can push it into my 410A production and make more 410A before the time runs out, right? So that's where the allocations come in, and that's why you're gonna see these two are kind of going away a lot quicker than most. They're gonna be very coveted and pricey when it comes down to it. And then we go all the way down to your R32 and your 454B, which we're gonna focus on. Those are your A2L refrigerants. 32 is a single refrigerant, 454B is a blend, right? You got 1, 2, 3, 4 YF, which we'll talk about, and you've also got the R32 here. So R32 is in a pretty good position if you think about it. It's in all these A2L refrigerants and even in 410A, right? So the one good thing about it is, again, it's a single refrigerant. So HFOs, this is what we're moving to. These are your A2Ls, all right? They're hydrofluoroolefins, and it took me about a good 4 months to be able to pronounce that correctly. But what we're looking at is a double-bonded carbon HFC for all you chemists out there. This is the big thing. It allows to break down in the atmosphere quicker. That's what these refrigerants do. Okay, so the way you look at it is each refrigerant molecule has a lifespan, right? So R-410A leaks out of the system, it goes up in the ozone layer and supposedly does its damage. Again, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a chemist, but that's what it does. It's got a certain lifespan out there. So if we look at it, 134A right here has a 13-year breakdown. So it's gonna go up there and it's gonna do for 13 years, it's gonna cause its issues, cause its damage. And then it's pretty much, that's its life, right? Then it becomes inert. The swap out for that, or the HFO, would be 1234YF is only 10 days. That's the drive for these refrigerants, plain and simple, all right? It's better for the environment. The next thing is GWPs, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. What does GWP stand for?
Global warming potential.
Global warming potential, right? The lower the GWP number, the better it is for the environment. So that's what they're putting all these regulations on. They're saying you gotta be below a certain GWP refrigerant by a certain time, okay? And we'll go over those. So 134A here has a 1300 GWP versus 1234YF, which is 1. Right, kind of where you get the whole 13 years versus 10 days. So that's the drive right here, is that GWP number, okay?
As compared to the ODP from like.
That's a great question. I usually don't bring this up when I'm being, but you know where I'm going with this, right?
I know where you're going.
So the interesting thing was, and this, so, what's that? No, so in R22, right? R22 I think had a GWP of 1800, I want to say it was, right around 1800. So you think, okay, we're going from R22 to R-410A, it's got to be a lower number, right? Because it's better for the environment. Well, the interesting thing was, R22 is at 1800. Guess what R-410A was at?
36 or something.
It was at 2200. So it went up. It went up 400 points.
Oh.
But when they did that refrigerant, they switched over to ODP, which is ozone depletion percentage. For R-410A, the ozone depletion percentage was 0. So it's kind of interesting how they went from this over to this and then back to GWP. Is what it is, right? Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up. I usually do, but then I was like, eh. So that was an interesting thing, but hey, again, it is what it is. So, HFOs and automotive. This is one of the things that I use. I tell contractors, especially my residential contractors, when a homeowner's going, oh, I don't want that flammable stuff in my house, blah, blah, blah. Here's one of the things you can use, all right? So, Mobile AC and US Automotive converted from 134 to 1234 or YF in 2013 model years. Now that was most cars. I would say about 96 to 98% of all vehicles now aren't using 134, they're using 1234 YF.
Really?
2016 is really when it ramped up. So yes, that's why if you've got a vehicle and the AC is going out, right? Oh, I got you. You don't want to lose that one.
No.
So when, so with these automobiles, right? If a homeowner's like, well, I don't want to do that. Think about it. You've got a mildly flammable A2L refrigerant in your automobile, right? In your car. So think about that. What's the difference between an automotive AC system versus a residential AC system?
Higher condenser temperature?
Yes, when you're getting specific, absolutely. But nice and simple, right? One's moving, one's not, right? One's hitting potholes, one's hitting this and that, and trust me, we've got a lot of those now. I'm waiting for a cracked rim. Try going to Indianapolis. It's horrible over there now. 70 is just, it's like a war zone. But, so think about it. You're driving this car with an A2L, a mildly flammable refrigerant in it, and you're banging all over the place, right? You're hitting potholes. How many cars have you heard that have blown up because of the refrigerant? Not a single one, right? You've got combustion engine in there. You've got spark plugs. You've got ignition sources. You've got everything in that vehicle, right? So if anywhere these things are going to blow up or catch fire, you would think it'd be an automotive.
No more cigarette lighters, though.
What's that?
No more cigarette lighters.
I don't know, my wife's car still has one.
Really?
She's never smoked in her life, but yeah, still got them.
Yeah.
A lot of the foreign cars still have
Smoking's
cigarette
bad
lighters
for
in
them.
them. So estimated 95% of new vehicles for sale in the US will be charged with YF, they already are. All right, so again, if you've got a newer vehicle and the AC's out, don't run up to AutoZone and just grab a can of 134 to refill, right? Make sure you know what refrigerant's in your vehicle before you do that. All right, so what replaces 410A? Now, when I say replaces, this isn't like, you know,
Drop in.
right. And the other thing is that the two most interesting words I hear in refrigerant world is drop in or top off, right?
Huh.
And this was one of the biggest issues that you had on the R22 conversion as well, is what did we come out with? R22 replacements, right? It was the biggest cluster, you know what, that I've ever seen in my entire life. We trained on it a lot of the times. But the thing was, you know, you had to pay attention. And I always kind of compare it to like, if you're a Milwaukee tool guy or a DeWalt tool guy, right? It's whatever you have the best experience with the first time you use it. If you use DeWalt and you had a great experience, you're probably DeWalt for your life, or Makita, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with these R22 replacements, because how many of them were out there? Right, you had New 22, you had, 407C, Blue On, all this different stuff. And what would happen is when they didn't educate the market as well as they should have when they first came out with these things to understand how they worked. Because I'll tell you right now, probably 60 to 70% of the entire market thought you could just top off an R22 system with this stuff. And you can't do that, right? So what happens when you do that? You're creating a whole brand new refrigerant. Now, some of the systems still ran, so on and so forth, okay, that's fine, but it was pretty messy for a while. We're not gonna have that in this transition. They're not gonna come out with a 410A, you know, replacement or anything else. It's going from 410A systems to R32 systems or 454B systems, that's it. So when we say top off, what does that mean? So if I got an R22 system, I want to top it off, how do I top it off?
With R22.
With R22, right? Same thing with 410A, same thing with 134, anything, right? These replacements are not top offs or drop ins, right?
Because they're mixed, they're two different.
Correct, they're two different refrigerants, but that's what I'm saying, you're creating a whole new refrigerant. Now you've got like 3 different refrigerants in there, or 4. The other thing we always get into, I always get somebody asking me questions about glide or fractionation and things like that with a blended refrigerant. In reality, that almost never ever happens. You guys work with flooded chillers?
Yeah, we see fractionation frequently, actually.
Do you work with flooded chillers?
No, what I'm talking about with 410,
Yeah.
we've seen a fraction.
Usually the one time you talk about seeing a lot of that is either in a dead system, right? Or an open system, or a flooded chiller. But I haven't run into too much.
Yeah,
Like we're,
most of the time, I mean, in a sealed system, you're not gonna see it do that.
Right.
If somebody does something stupid, it's when it's leaking,
right.
so.
Yep, no, that's what I'm saying, an open system or,
Right.
and again, flooded chillers are kind of the same way. You've got to take those a certain way because it's all coming off the top or whatever it may be. So R32. Now this is the refrigerant you got, again, with 410A, it was half R32. Now it's just going to a single refrigerant. That's what's being used as the A2L. So you have R32 and the next we'll talk about is 454. But R32 is a pure HFC, obviously, as I said. These are all mildly flammable, mildly flammable. I'm gonna give you some resources here in a second to where if you really wanna do some light reading because you can't fall asleep at night, get about 3 pages in and you're done, all right? It's very interesting stuff. But, so this is another sticking point here. So we got a GWP of 675, all right? And the one thing I've found out over the last couple of months, I know a couple guys who are really big in the refrigerant market, know a lot of stuff. I was starting to hear that as of 2030, there's a regulation put in place that all refrigerants have to be below 600 GWP in order to move along, right? And that was kind of that threshold. So that's why a lot of the other OEMs and manufacturers went to 454B, which I'll show you in a second, because they're saying, well, this is 675. As of 2030, the regulation says it has to be under 600 in order to be keeping to use it more. Well, that's complete hogwash. There's no such regulation out there. At the very beginning in 2020, when they were talking about a lot of this, that was bantered around is that they wanted everything under 600 past 2030. There is no such regulation. There's no EPA papers, no EPA documentation. So if somebody tells you, oh, I'm not gonna use 32 because it's not gonna be around in 5 years, not true at all, all right? As of right now, unless they come out with some new regulation, which I never say they won't, but as of right now, there's no such thing as that. Because again, a lot of people out there peddling that it has to be 600 and below in order to be used past 2030, okay? The nice thing is, one of the big things is similar pressures to 410A, all right? I'll show a chart here in a minute to show you that. It's up to a 7% increase in capacity over 410A. Does anybody know who manufactures or who owns the patent to 32? Daikin. I'll go over that in a second. So they're doing very, very well for themselves with that patent, right? So they've got it in 410A, they've got it in this, they've got it in 454B, and a lot of the refrigerants that are coming out. The biggest thing is it's EPA approved for new AC, HP equipment and no retrofits. The other thing I wanted to bring up too, have any of you seen the flex coils that are talking about out there?
No.
There's a certain brand, I don't bring up brands, but there's a certain brand that call it a flex coil. All right, there's a lot of misinformation around this as well. And the same sources that told me about the 600 number also told me about this flex coil. What they were saying is that you can use this flex coil in a 410A or an A2L system. There's no such thing as that. All right, I just want to kind of put that clear. You cannot have a coil that uses 410A and also uses 454B or 32. Okay, and I'll show you why here in a minute. But it's either got to be a 454B coil or system. You put 454B in it. 32 system, put 32 in it. 410A system, 410A. That's how that works. So the next one, you've got the Opteon product and you've got the Solstice product. Opteon is Chemours, which is over there, the old DuPont, right? And then Solstice is Honeywell. So they're going to be the manufacturers of 454B, okay? It's a blend. So you've got 32 at about 70%. You got 1, 2, 3, 4 YF at about 30%. A little different, obviously, 68.9 and 31.1. But it's a blended refrigerant, okay? Mildly flammable again. This one's got a GWP of 466. So the way this all works is they come out with these new refrigerants that the EPA demands, and then what do? These manufacturers run out to all the OEMs, the manufacturers and everything else, and say our refrigerant's the best and blah, 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 and this and that, and they put their spins on it, they market it and try to get it out there. And usually what happens is when that first big OEM falls, the others kind of fall into place. So I would say right now the market is probably about 70%, 65, 70% 454B, and the other 30% is R32, okay? Any Daikin affiliated products that you got out there are going to be R32, and there's a couple others along the way that also adopt R32 as well. But I think what happened was when they were first out there marketing it, it was this number. That's where that 600 GWP limit came out at 2030. They're going, hey, you know, as of 2030, you won't be able to use this, which was kind of BS, but that's what they do. It's got around negative 4% capacity compared to 410A. It's very similar still. And again, EPA approved, so these two are good to go. Here's some of your pressures, right? 410A to 454B. That capacity is very similar. Performance, very, very similar. Suction pressure, same all the way across the thing. So that's going to be the big thing here is this refrigerant, both these refrigerants are literally when you're working on them compared to a 410A system, it's not going to be much different at all. All right, it's going to be very, very similar. It's just using your common sense, and we'll get into the mildly flammable part here shortly. And this one shows you 410A, 454B, and R32. And as you can see across the board, everything is very, very similar. Okay, there's not much difference. Whereas when we went from 22 to 410A, right, you had to get new gauges and this and that. The pressures are different. Everybody's worried about the pressures. So not a big change with these. So this is kind of what I was talking about with the OEMs. So on the 454B side, you had Chemours and Honeywell, and then on the R32 side, you had Daikin, right? So what they do is they go out and they send their marketers out there and their salespeople, and they go out and talk to the big dogs, right? You got JCI, you got Carrier, you got Trane. And again, they want one of them to endorse their refrigerant, because once that happens, hey, everybody's saying, well, they're doing it, so we're gonna go do that too, right? So first what happened was you had Carrier came on way back in 2018 and said, okay, we're gonna endorse 454B, right? They, once again, taking the leadership and blah, 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 blah. So they go 454B, everybody in the market takes notice. So after that, guess what happens? February 2021, Trane comes on board, and then May 2021, JCI comes on board. You get those three, guess what? Okay, you've planted yourself in the marketplace, and a lot of other people, it's like that first big domino falls, then the rest of them follow after it, okay? So they jumped on it, and they got most of the market share. So Daikin and R32, and this is another thing you can tell homeowners or people that are worried about these mildly flammable refrigerants. Daikin was the first to introduce air conditioning and heat pump technology utilizing refrigerant 32. As of 2020, they sold 28 million units in more than 100 countries. This stuff, these A2Ls have been used overseas in Europe and things like that, Asia, since 2013, all right? It's just new to us. You don't hear anything about these big skyscrapers and everything else over in the Middle East that are, you know, exploding because of the refrigerant, catching on fire because of the refrigerant, okay? The other big thing is approximately 140 million units of R32 equipment have been sold globally as of December 2020. That was 5 years ago. All right, so there's a lot of these systems out there running. It's just new to us. This is another one for you guys, and you guys have probably worked with this a little bit. I'm assuming you do a lot of 404 work or a good amount. Yeah. So you guys know your replacements for 404? You got 449 from Chemours, you got 448 from Honeywell. You got HFC, HFO blend, right? You got all your different mixtures in here, I'm not gonna go through all those. Same thing, so you get your 448 in your mixtures, and you got 449 in your mixtures. It's still an A1 classification, all right? So this is an A2L, it's not considered mildly flammable like the other ones. It does require POE changes, oil changes, right? And the GWP is still better than obviously what 404 was, and that was the main thrust of this. You got 1282 and you got 1273 for the two, all right? It has slightly better capacity, less energy consumption. That was the push towards that. So this was way back when both Chemours and Honeywell said, hey, we're gonna come out with a replacement for it so we can sell it, and that's your replacements for it. So, flammable refrigerants, and this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, right, with A2Ls. Everybody know the difference between an A2L and an A3 refrigerant?
One's flammable.
One's highly flammable, right, and one's mildly flammable, okay? But pretty much what you're talking about, and we'll get into this here in a second. So A2L refrigerants are class refrigerants that have lower toxicity and flammability than A2 or A3s, okay? It's confirmed by HRI, it takes 3 failures in the system to ignite an A2L refrigerants. Think about it this way, you guys all do combustion testing, right? What are the 3 things you need for proper combustion?
Heat, air.
Fuel, oxygen,
Air.
ignition source, right? So think of that too. But we're dealing with natural gas, we're dealing with propane, things like that. So obviously that's an A3. So you need all those things in one. It was interesting, I had a contractor one time ask me and said, well, if we're using these A2Ls, do I have to put the open flame water heater so far away from the system? And nowhere in there does it even say anything about a pilot light, right? You gotta remember, these A2Ls are heavier than air. So what's gonna happen is if there is a leak, it's gonna come out, it's gonna kind of slowly float down to the floor. Even if I was to light this stuff and actually get it lit, what's gonna happen is it's gonna be a slow blue flame that comes down. If it's puddled up on the floor, it's gonna do a slow blue flame and it's gonna put itself out, okay? So there'd have to be a significant refrigerant leak. The leak would have to be sufficient to reach the lower flammability limit, okay, which is concentrations for AFL or A2Ls are above 10%. And there would have to be an open flame or high energy ignition source where the concentration is sufficient to ignite the refrigerant, okay? It's like 1 in a million chance that something's gonna happen. It might catch fire, but it's just gonna burn itself out once it's done. It's not gonna make that big explosion, all right? And some of the information I'll give you here in a second, I'll give you some spots where you can go and you can actually see the pictures and images of them trying to get this stuff to ignite and explode. This is pretty much your charts here. Okay, so your higher flammability refrigerants here, right? Pretty much what you're looking at is, this is the ones we use the most in this market are 290 and 600, right? Those are in the small little mini cans,
Yeah.
right? And what are those used for mainly? Smaller systems, right? I think up to just a little bit ago, I think the most concentration you could have in a system of an A3 refrigerant was 5.8 ounces, I want to say. I've heard for some commercial applications, you can get up to 15 ounces, 12 to 15 ounces, but there's not a lot of this refrigerant in there, all right?
No.
But your A3s, right, and your B3 refrigerants, those are your higher flammability. Then we get down to A2s, which is still not for today, right? We get down, the refrigerants that we're working with are A2Ls, but you've got exhibits flame propagation, they're flammable, but you got 152, 413, so on and so forth. And then R40 over here, the B2, which is methyl chloride. Then we get to the lower flammability. And that's why I like to say lower flammability rather than mildly flammable, right? So lower flammability, this is what we're gonna be working with. These are our A2Ls, right? That's the 1234YF, 32, 454B, and a couple others. Also, in the B2L category with lower flammability is ammonia. All right, and then we got no flame propagation. Those are your A1s and your B1s. A1s, the ones we've been working with for years and years and years. Your 410A, 134, 404, all those good ones, okay? So this is where you can go to get that lovely information I was talking about, all right? HRI report number 8028. I've looked over this, and again, this is the one where if you're trying to fall asleep at night, start reading it, get about 3 pages in and you're falling asleep, okay? It's interesting. You keep flipping, you'll get to the pictures. But pretty much what they do is, they go down here, they compare 410A, 32, 454B, and 466A. Those are the 2 new refrigerants. They've got 4 different systems, they put them through like 3 different trials, and they try to get this stuff to ignite, okay? They give them oxygen sources, they give them fuel sources, more fuel, less fuel, and then they do flame spread and smoke develop applications to it. They got pictures, all that good stuff. This was published back in 2021. The biggest thing out of it was, as they said, this was after like 260 pages of this stuff, they came out and said no significant flammability concerns from A1 to A2L refrigerants. And that's the EPA saying that, all right? The other thing that you can go, where I always recommend everybody go to, is right here, the A2L refrigerants and the firefighter tactical considerations. You can go on the National Firefighters Website Association page. You can go in there and you can literally search for any refrigerant or any chemical compound that can ignite, because they have to know how to put these things out, right? So you can go in there and they've got all the information you could possibly imagine, right? You can get the flame spread, you can see what happens to certain tests, and this 8028 will also be listed in there as well, all right? So the use of A2Ls and what's new. This is the big one, and as I was talking about before, they've got some flex coil things they're talking about out there, which there's no such thing. If you see one, somebody tells you, oh, you can use this for 410A or an A2L refrigerant, not true, all right? I think they're starting to pull those away. Systems are designed to mitigate flammability risks, all right? These systems out there have either RDS systems, which are refrigerant dissipation systems, okay, or mitigation systems. So that's why I say if it's a 454B system, you can only use 454B on there. Why? What is an RDS system? Anybody know? It's like a leak detection system. So every one of these systems are going to come with leak detection on it. So if it's a 454B system, it's going to have a leak detection system on it saying it's testing for 454B. All right, 32, testing for 32. Service technicians will be required to use tools such as pumps, leak detectors, rated for A2L refrigerants. I'll go over that as well. Indirect systems where refrigerant can enter an occupied space, and there's going to be new safety standards for those. So it's going to be require additional features to enhance safety. Refrigerant sensors in the product, like I just said, evaluation of the refrigerant charge and conditioned space. So let's see, conditioned space following this UL code. A2 and A3 refrigerant charges will be limited to 114 grams in the US and Canada. So normally, and I got a good place for you to go on those too. So your A3 refrigerants, right? Your propane, your butane. When I said you can only use so many ounces within inside a sealed system, one of the big ones, and they've got great videos on this to kind of put a lot of people at ease, is True. You guys familiar with the True brand, right? Your coolers and commercial equipment, things like that. They all use propane and butane. And they actually they have two 15-minute videos on there explaining these, and they'll do an actual compressor, removal of an A3 refrigerant. Now the beautiful thing about A3s are, for one, they're very efficient. Two, right? You know what their GWP number is? 0. There is no recovery of an A3 refrigerant. You don't have to recover it. Up in Madison, Ohio, I used to work with it was an appliance repair shop, right? And they would get refrigerators, mini fridges, things like that. Even like this. I mean, how old is this one?
It's one of the A2s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing is, a lot of them now, like even your mini fridges, right? The kids take to college or school or whatever else. You look up underneath the ceiling of them, and it says flammable propane butane, right? Because it's a very small charge. So in this True video, what he does is he takes the compressor out, and what do you think he does to recover it? He snips the line,
Cut it,
right?
yeah.
So the only thing, and when I was at this appliance place, they said, because they deal with this stuff a lot, right? They're dealing with these mini fridges, window shakers now, window units are gonna have A3 refrigerants, propane, butane. So all he does is snip the line, because you don't have to worry about it hurting the atmosphere, it's 0 GWP. The only time you would want to technically recover it is if you're in an enclosed space and you don't want that stuff, leaking out while you're in there. So you know what they use? I never knew this, and I've been teaching recovery and evacuation for 18 years. Recovery bags.
Yeah.
I never knew about recovery bags. So I asked him, like, you guys got one? I kid you not, the kid pulls out a Kroger bag from his back pocket. I was joking, right? But they have special recovery bags. So what you do is you snip a line, put the bag over there, let it release into the bag. You take it outside, you let it go. And actually in this video, after he does that, he literally takes a lighter on the end of it, lights it, and it's a little candle flame, and it lasts for about 30 seconds, and then it goes out, right? And that's a propane or butane, so that's an A3, a highly flammable refrigerant. Now, I don't recommend doing that, but that's what they show. So you go to True's website, and you go to service, they'll show you those two videos. It's really kind of cool. So for indirect systems, right, machine rooms, there's gonna be new ventilation requirements, right? Maybe bigger fans, so on and so forth, exhaust, so, that type of thing. And then again, you got first responder training and procedures. That's why with the firefighters and things like that, they gotta know about this stuff in case there is a fire, right? They know how to put these things out. So there's a lot of detailed information on A2Ls through the firefighters.
Jeff, what's the difference between the A2 and the A2L? And how do you designate that?
Go back here.
Lower flammability.
A2L is low.
Right.
So they're both, A2 is flammable, right? Exhibits flame propagation when tested at 60 degrees, or, I'm sorry, 140 degrees. Has an LFL of 10 or greater than 10. A2Ls have to have lower than 10, right? And has a heat combustion of this number here.
Okay.
So you're talking 8,169 BTU per pound, right? Then we go down to the A2Ls here, the mildly that we're gonna be dealing with. The LFL is lower than. So you've got, has a heat combustion of 1900, blah, 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 maximum burning velocity. So these are considered, A2Ls are considered flammable, right? A2Ls are considered lower flammable. And if you want to, I can say this presentation too. sometime.
That would be great.
Yeah.
The reason I brought it up is because people have a tendency to say, okay, it
A2.
just got shortened from A2L to A2.
Yeah, no, they're
Yeah.
they're different, no doubt about it. Yeah, because you go A3s higher, A2 flammable, A2L right lower, and then A1's no flame propagation whatsoever. Use of A2Ls was new. We already did that. Did we do that? No, here we go. All right, so design requirements, and this is really where all this came in for A2Ls was more on the OEM and the manufacturers, right? They got to make their systems, I guess you could say, spark proof, right? Which they've done over the last 5 years. They've been coming out with these systems. So, design requirement focus on prevention labeling, indicating flammable refrigerant class, minimum room area, safety features dependent on refrigerant detection, and total charge after field adjustment, leak prevention, improved piping practices, and joint requirements. As you'll see when we talk about commissioning the system, we'll go through that whole process and what's new in those, right? But as I've always said with anything, is when you're brazing, always braze with nitrogen, one way or the other, all right? Because if you don't, you're leaving a bunch of crap in that system, and when you pull a vacuum on it, I can tell every single time when it hasn't been brazed with nitrogen, there's a bunch of junk in there. And I think that was one of the main reasons, you guys remember when they were doing 410A systems, they put that, what was that, AC Renew stuff, because TXVs were
Yeah.
getting all clogged up?
The acids.
I think that happened for two reasons. One was the brazing practices, you left all the debris in there. And two was the POE oil and not getting vacuum, not getting the moisture out of there. I think those are the two main things that caused those TXV issues. Preventing flammable concentrations from forming, obviously. You got refrigerant charge limits, minimum room area, onboard leak detection, as we talked about before. That's that RDS system that you'll be hearing about, right? Refrigerant dissipation systems, or you'll have mitigation. But there's gonna be a leak detection on there, right? And what'll happen is, or active mitigation. So what's gonna happen is every system, every brand is gonna be a little bit different. They're gonna come with a leak detection for that refrigerant built into the system, okay? So once that leak detection system detects a leak, and again, this is where it differs a little bit. Some systems might just shut down depending on the manufacturer. This is where you gotta read the manufacturer's, information. But what'll happen is the blower motor kicks on, right? And it's gonna dissipate the refrigerant throughout. Now, I know like Carrier, I believe, I was watching their videos, and I can send this over to you if you want to too. He actually does a really nice little demonstration of this. I believe Carrier does it 3 times. So what they'll do is it'll detect the leak, it'll shut down the cycle, whatever the cycle is, whether you're in heating mode or whatever, and then the blower will kick on and dissipate that refrigerant for a certain set amount of time. Then the system will kick back on and go back to normal operations, no more leak, everything's good. It'll do that up to 3 times. So after the 3rd time, right, and it still has a leak, it's gonna code out the system, and you're gonna have to call a contractor to come in and work on it. Some will shut off right away. It all depends on the manufacturer. It's all pretty similar, but a little bit different. And this is the big one, was ignition prevention, right? So prohibition of competent ignition sources for A2Ls, they're using flame arresting closures. So meaning every little spark place that could possibly be on that system is now completely enclosed, all right? That was the big thing. So, we've got our practices using this refrigerant, so on and so forth, but really it came down to what the OEMs were doing with their systems, okay? So these things have all gone through their testings and they're HRI approved and so on and so forth, so they're good to go. And obviously you got service training, literature, all that good stuff. Transportation, as far as I know, for you guys, as of right now, there's no difference transporting A2Ls as there is 410A. All right, same thing.
There is supposedly, they have to be transported vertically instead of horizontally.
I've heard that, and the reason is because of the valves, the rupture discs, and I'll talk
The
about those
relief
for a second
valves, yeah.
too, right?
Yeah.
So I won't get into all this, but you pretty much follow your same rules as you do with 410, okay? There is one difference between the cylinders, and I'll talk about that in a second. Actually, I'll talk about it right now. So A2L cylinders. you're gonna have different cylinders for A2Ls than you do for your 410A and so on and so forth. As you all know, that all the cylinders out there now are all one single color, which I think is horrible. What I was recommended is take some spray paint and put a dot on there of the color that it was, whatever it may be, so you can tell. But all your A2L cylinders will have a left-handed thread. All the systems are gonna be right-hand thread, just like they have been, but the cylinders themselves, recovery cylinders and the cylinders that the refrigerant comes in, are gonna be left-hand thread. So I think it's JB's out there, Yellow Jacket, a lot of the big brands, they all have left-hand thread adapters. Me being an Appian guy, we haven't come out with anything yet. We're coming out with a whole new system. I don't know what that involves, but there'll be a whole new hose system and everything else to make it easier so that you don't have to hook up these different adapters and all that stuff. So there'll be a red band. So as you can see with the different ones here, right? You got a red band around here, you got red tops on here, and you got the red top over here. Now for storage, from what I understand, it's gonna be stored just like you would propane or butane or anything else like that. If it's internal, like if it's inside your warehouse or whatever, it has to be, or it has to have a fire suppression system, so sprinkler system or whatever it may be, just like you would for propane or butane. Outside, it has to be caged off or at least blocked off, just like you would propane or butane, okay? Now this is what's interesting, going along with what Tom said, you know, how you have to store them in your truck. The disposable cylinders for A2Ls will no longer use a rupture disc, right? That's what we used before. These are all gonna be PRV valves. So you guys all know, I remember the days with recovery machines, they used to sell, they used to have a thing in there, 80% cutoffs for recovery machines. They stopped doing that. You know why?
Because people were bypassing them anyway.
Well, they were bypassing, or even still, when you turn off the machine, or shut off, they could still flow refrigerant into them. It really didn't do much. So that's why they got rid of those. But what happens here is your PRV, once it gets above 80% in that tank of pressure, it's gonna open up, it's gonna release. And when it gets back below 80%, it's gonna seal itself back up, okay?
The reason they want that vertical is because they don't want to be dumping liquid,
Right.
because it won't reset.
So, a couple new steps added versus what we were doing with 410A. So A2L installation and repair. All right, so we're gonna safely remove the refrigeration. I got the A1s, right? This will be like your 410A. This is gonna be your new refrigerants over here. So safely remove refrigerant, meaning recover, okay? That's required obviously on 410A, it's required on this too. So we're gonna recover the refrigerant. Then what's new is we're gonna, after we recover that refrigerant, we're gonna purge the circuit with inert gas, so oxygen-free nitrogen, right? So we're gonna recover, then we're gonna purge. Okay, that's a new step. Then from there, after we purge, we're going to evacuate that system, right? Before we start working on it. So you're gonna recover, you're gonna purge, bless you, and you're gonna evacuate, all right? What they're doing is we're making sure we get everything out there that we possibly can. And then these are recommended, right? So they want you to purge it with another 5 minutes and evacuate again. Those are all just optional. If you want to do that, you can do that, but I don't see too many people doing that. Then from there, we're allowed to open the circuit by cutting or brazing, right? So no problems. We've evacuated, we've purged, or I'm sorry, we've recovered, we've purged, we've evacuated, now we get down to opening up by brazing. And then we're gonna do our changes, our repairs, and we're gonna repair the system, brazing, purge with nitrogen. I always recommend that one way or the other. You have to purge with nitrogen when you're brazing, all right? And then we're going to leak test and pressure test. This is what's interesting to me. Under A1s, that was all recommended, which I don't quite get that. Everybody does that, and it should be done anyway. But obviously it's required on these new A2L systems. Then we're gonna evacuate just like we would for today, and then we're gonna charge the system, okay? So your two main steps are right here. I would say actually three, okay? So you're gonna recover, purge, evacuate. Well, this one's out of there. So these two right here is gonna be that new step, okay? Then we get into service tools. Now, as far as I know, I've heard different stances on this. I know that Appian is fully A2L. We're actually A2L certified, all right? So we actually went to UL, did all the A2L testings, and the way, from what I understand, the way they do that is they'll take a recovery machine and they'll put it in this box, right? And they'll dump propane or butane, which is an A3, they'll dump that in there and let it sit in there for 15 minutes. They don't do anything to it, they just let it sit in there and nothing happens, okay? Then they'll do another test where they put it in that box and they dump propane or butane and then they turn a switch on. Nothing happens, right? And then they're A2L certified. Most systems out there, most equipment, or I should say service tools, are A2L approved or A2L recognized or things like that. As long as you got that on there, you're good to go. Just Appian went the extra step and actually got certified on those. So obviously, all these things, you know, you get your manifold sets, right? Those would be right hand thread, just like everything else. Your charging hoses are gonna be right hand thread as well, except your adapters, but on the systems. Your cylinders, okay, those are gonna be left-hand threads, as I talked about before, with a big red stripe around them. Vacuum pumps, again, just check with the manufacturer that you're using. I know you guys all use Appian, you would never go to anything else, there's no reason to. But yeah, whatever brand you're using, just make sure it's A2L approved and certified. If you go out and buy anything nowadays, and you also gotta take into consideration multimeters, combustion analyzers, right, things that you're gonna be around a system. Make sure that they all have A2L approval with them as well. You don't really think about that with multimeters, but you're out there on that system working with them. I remember my dad was talking about working nuclear power plants, everything had to be intrinsically safe, right? You had to have intrinsically safe meters and so on and so forth, or you couldn't bring them in, same thing. Gas leak detectors, you wanna make sure those are A2L compatible, right? And that they're gonna be able to find 454B and 32 and things like that. Electronic leak detectors, scales, there's no change there. A lot of these scales are going digital, but it still doesn't really mean much. It's not gonna, you know, cause any sparks or anything like that. Your ventilations, ventilation fans, they're similar, but there may be difference in machine rooms, right? They have to be bigger, they have to be enclosed, they have to be, make sure there's no sparking and things like that in there. Electrical hand tools, as I said before, non-sparking, so these are gonna have to be intrinsically safe. So when you're out there buying a multimeter, when you're out there buying certain things that you wouldn't even consider with refrigerant, you wanna make sure that these things are A2L approved as well. As we said before, vacuum pumps and recovery machines will need to meet AHRI and UL certifications for use with A2L and A3 refrigerants. Now, the one thing I want to tell you right now is do not recover A3 refrigerants. There's not a recovery machine out there that I know of, at least in this class of recovery machines, that are for A3 refrigerants. I did see at one point in time, I had a distributor up in Michigan call me up and say, hey, can we recover A3s? I said, absolutely not. They sent me, it was a picture of, I think it was a Master Cool recovery machine, I want to say. It's like a small little unit that says it's good for A3 and A2Ls, but I'm telling you right now, you do not want to recover A3 refrigerants. So Appian, little story here, Appian is manufactured in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and that was the first state to legalize, a certain product. I guess in the manufacturing of that product, they use a lot of butane, I want to say. So all of a sudden, this is probably about 6-7 years ago, Appian, they do their own repairs, right? You send them in, you get them repaired. They were finding resin, like they would take these things apart, the piston housings and everything else, they were finding resin and all this stuff in there. They were using them for grow houses to recapture butane. Well, what started happening was they would get so much butane built up in the machine, one little spark, and guess what happens? Boom, right? So the first thing Appian did as soon as they found out about that was they put a liability thing out there saying we are not liable for any use in A3s. These are not used for A3 refrigerants. So what I'm trying to say is do not recover A3 refrigerants, okay? With vacuum pumps, it really doesn't matter too much because we've gotten all the refrigerant out there. We purge with gas, you put your vacuum pump on. It's like, people always ask me with ammonia systems too, can you recover ammonia with a recovery machine? We recommend not doing that.
Water.
But can you use a vacuum pump on an A2 or on an ammonia system after? Yes, you can. We just recommend, flushing that vacuum pump out after that, right? That ammonia, or any leftovers sit inside that thing, it's just gonna tear it all apart.
So I used to work with a tank that had 40,000 pounds of ammonia.
Mhm.
They used it at SK Wellman to tried hardened gears. And when they had the tanker come in, they would connect the hose up, so out of the top of the tank, they took the vapor out, put it back in the tank, and then the liquid went into the tank.
Mhm.
When they were done, they just sprayed water on it.
Yeah.
It's not, ammonia in the atmosphere is no biggie.
No, it's just, but I think when you talk about people like us, right, it's oxygen depletion, right?
Yeah.
Am I correct in saying that? So that's the big fear of that is, and that's why a lot of guys will wear like oxygen depletion sensors. Especially like when you're down, I talk to guys all the time because we saw that SensorCon, CO monitor.
Yeah,
They've got a couple other ones where it really comes down to oxygen depletion, sulfide,
18%, you're in trouble.
right, well, a lot of guys will
16
say, they go down digging, right, they go down into these holes and they
Oh,
start
yeah.
digging. I remember somebody told me a story, it was, he and his son were working together on at a facility. And he went down into the hole, right, and started working, and he just passed out and he was done. And he was gonna get in there to go get him.
And
And
the
his other
second guy-
coworkers were holding him back.
In Cleveland, 3 different people went down.
Because think about it, you see somebody pass out down there, your first instinct is to help them out.
Yeah.
You don't realize that there's no oxygen down there, and that's why
Yeah.
they're passing out, right?
Yeah.
So it's that whole oxygen, replacement or
Under
displacement.
16, you're done.
Yeah, yep. So that's why, even still, especially with ammonia, you guys will see a lot of them wearing those types of sensors because, again, it's,
You can detect 1 part per million ammonia.
yeah.
And when you get up like 10, your eyes are like, oh, it's bad.
Well, I mean, even when, I've done that a couple times, when you're sitting in there and you're, usually like I've got a little ice maker down in my basement, right? I use vinegar on it, right? I don't
Yeah,
use
yeah.
any of the other stuff because it's technically potable water as it is.
Yeah.
But have you ever done that where you're like, go online and say, oh, there's this new bug thing that keeps bugs away, and you mix this and you mix that, and all of a sudden you got like, was it vinegar and then bleach, which you're not supposed to do, right? But people have made that mistake a ton of times, but all of a sudden you catch a whiff of that, like, ooh, it's amazing how that stuff can hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, like I said, manufacturers have to have proper label machines that meet this new certification. I will tell you this right now, if you're working with the G5 Twin or any of our products, even if it doesn't have that on there, you're okay. All of our products, and I believe it's the same for most manufacturers, you would have to ask them, if you're using a NAVAC or a field piece machine or whatever else, if you're wondering, I would call in, but they should be fine. I don't see any issues with that whatsoever. There's a lot of the guys I follow online that, one of them, he's got a huge font, probably the largest. You guys ever listen to AC Service Tech LLC? He's got a YouTube channel, Craig Maglaccio, he's phenomenal. He does a lot of good stuff. He was out recently just saying, yeah, you really, I don't want to quote him because I'm not saying that, but he got to the point where saying you're good with the machines that you have to work on A2Ls. Because again, they've been using these machines over in Europe and everything else for the last, 15 years on this stuff. So most of it should be good, but if you have any questions, ask your manufacturer and they'll provide any information. And then some existing machines, like I just said, were already safe to be used with A2L refrigerants and are now labeled. That's all of our stuff is good with A2Ls, no problems. So the biggest thing on this is obviously change is coming, right? It's happening. This is going. It's not going back to 410A. We're not going back to other refrigerants. We're moving forward. The biggest thing again I can say is 410A is not going to go away. You're gonna have plenty of 410A for a very, very long time. All right. There's a lot of it out there. It's gonna be around for quite some time. Same thing with 134. 404 is gonna be around through reclaim and so on and so forth. But I mean, if you really needed to, you can still find some R12 out there nowadays, right? If you needed to, it's still out there.
Art?
Do you?
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk. No, I mean, we still sell, we try to, anytime we can as a reclaim, we try to get a hold of as much R12 as we can because it's still needed out there. But think about, when did they stop R12?
Like 92, something like that?
It was a long time ago, right? Because then they came out with Hot Shot 2 and all those. But think about it, you could, if you wanted to, and you wanted to pay, and somebody wanted 12 in their system, you can get it, right? So that's the only thing is once the consumption starts going down in the United States, and you start losing this refrigerant, and again, through reclaiming practices or whatever else, leaking and all that, that's when the prices are gonna go up. But again, there's so much 410A out in the marketplace, I don't see that happening for quite some time.
R12 has a big, classic automobile.
Oh, yeah. That was the big automotive refrigerant before, and then they went to 134A,
Yeah.
right, and then now they're going to 1234YF, absolutely. And you could probably still, I mean, what was the running joke the guys always said when you're flushing out an R12 system? What do you flush out with? Pretty much R12, right? Or 11 here, but you're sitting there, you just pump an R12 the other end, wait for it to come out the other end and cap it off, right?
Yeah.
But again, it was a mineral oil refrigerant. You didn't have to worry about the moisture issue with that either. There's a lot of great sources out there, and I know a lot of you guys are in social media and things like that. There's HVAC School Group. ESCO is a very good one, right? HVAC Excellence, they're phenomenal. And there's a lot of good guys out there. Like you got Tyler on the combustion side, Ty Bramman. If you follow any guys from ESCO, they're really, really good. And then you got NCI too, right? The NCI guys are top notch as well. And then obviously stay informed. I would recommend the systems that you're installing the most of, the brands that you're affiliated with. I know that doesn't happen on service, you can be working on anything, but bone up on what their RDS systems are and their mitigation systems. What their cycles are, right? If they notice a leak, does it just shut down? If it notices a leak, does it kick the blower on, right? A lot of them are it's gonna come to the same end where somebody's gonna come out and service, but know what that RDS system is for that piece of equipment, all right? And what I'll do is I'll send you over the carrier one so you can actually
Thanks.
see how that runs. Obviously get trained, what you guys are doing. The biggest thing on this is using common sense. There is a lot of misinformation out there I remember way back when people were talking about actual hydrocarbons being a mix in these refrigerants. Or, this guy, it carries, 3 or 5% propane in it as well. That's not true. There is no propane or butane in these refrigerants. All right, so it's knowing the difference between A3 refrigerant, which is propane and butane, and A2L refrigerants, which is not, okay? That's where a lot of things are getting kind of mixed up. Lastly, for those homeowners and things like that are worried about these refrigerants and mildly flammable, as I said before, point to their car. 2, tell them this stuff's been used in Europe since 2011, 2012, right, with no issues whatsoever. The other one I come up to is, well, what's that big black pipe running through the bottom of your house? Right?
Methane.
Well, that one too. My house, that one's white, but yeah.
Right.
No, but you got natural gas running through these houses, you got, propane running through these houses, and I think once you start to get them to understand that, they're like, oh, okay. Especially in their vehicles, right? Now, I do know, I've learned to never say never when it comes to this kind of thing, because they can come out with a regulation tomorrow and say, hey, we're gonna do this now, right? You can never tell what they're gonna do. But when I go to the A3s, they used to say they're not gonna come out with a propane or butane system for residential applications. I did find out, this was 2 AHR shows ago, expos, that there was a company out there, and what they're doing is they're using propane, butane as their refrigerant. So you got the condensing unit sitting outside, and it's completely run off of propane, butane. So how are they cooling the house?
Chilling.
It's pretty much a loop, right? It's either glycol or chilled water or whatever it is. So they're doing everything outside with the propane and butane, and then they're running it into the coil from there, which I think is kind of interesting. I could see the market going that way. So I think what I understand is they're beta testing around the United States right now. They're gonna let them run out there for a couple of years, and then you might see that pop up, right? The other thing is I'm seeing a big demand for CO2 as well. Huge demand. I've got, a lot of distributors calling up asking for CO2 cylinders and things like that. So something's moving there as well.
Really high pressure for
Yeah.
CO2.
The supermarkets are all moving to CO2.
Yeah. And it started off with all your European chains too, your Aldis and things like that. They were the ones really pushing towards that. I think now that they've got some data under their belts, they're looking at it going, hey, we want to do this too.
It's a lot less expensive than any
Oh, yeah.
handmade stuff, too. And you don't have to recover it.
But that goes back to what we were
Yeah,
talking
that
about at the beginning.
CO2 in the atmosphere, oh my God.
Yeah. It's gonna make oxygen,
Yeah, but that pretty much rounds it out. Guys have any questions?
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it again.
Too short,
Good job.